Good day, fellow educators! My name is Jenna Grace A. Lamis, a teacher from the Division of General Santos City, also a first-year student of Applied Linguistics. I am tasked to present about corpus methods and functional linguistics. This topic is a bit challenging, but I do hope you will learn something. The reference of our discussion today is the book entitled Corpus Linguistics by Tony McInerney and Andrew Hardy. Today, we are going to deal with the following topics: a brief overview of functionalism in linguistics, the different corpus-based research from a functionalist perspective, corpora and typology, corpora and the cognitive approaches to linguistics, and the corpora in the analysis of metaphor. Functionalism in linguistics. Chomskyan linguistics, a school of linguistics which arose from and largely succeeded in American structuralism, and which takes its cues from the work of Noam Chomsky. It can be characterized as a formal approach that seeks to identify the most abstract logical systems underlying the rules of language, considered as an innate human capacity. Chomskyan language was the most dominant school of linguistics in the 1960s and 1970s. Functionalism is an approach to linguistic theory which seeks to explain the forms of language structures by reference to how they are used, involving such factors as communicative purposes, how utterances are processed, and so on. Language and use make functionalism comparative with corpus linguistics, while formalist linguistics is not. Functionalism, in a nutshell, is the rejection of formalism. Functionalists investigate language form, but explain it with reference to the functions to which language is put. Language is not seen as an abstract, isolated system, but one that is used to communicate meaning and is shaped by the ways it is used. These approaches, cognitive linguistics, functional grammar, and typology in functionalism, coincide with the nature of language and relationship to the nature of thought. Let us define cognitive linguistics. Cognitive linguistics is an approach to linguistic theory closely allied to functionalism, which seeks to explain language in terms of what is known about how mind works, especially in cognition. Cognitive linguistics approaches language in a way that prioritizes human thought as an explanation for the observed characteristics of language. In particular, conceptualization, or how people construct abstract concepts and schemata to think about the world, is a major explanatory factor. More specifically, language is explained in terms of modes of cognition that are domain general, not particular to language, and that can be demonstrated to exist independently of the role in language. There are comprehensive theories of grammar rooted in the cognitive linguistics, most notably the Cognitive Grammar by Langacker, 1987, 1991, and 2008, and the Construction Grammar by Goldberg, 1995, and Croft, 2001. Other topics of wide interest include the impact of language, semantics in particular, of cognitive processes such as categorization, priming and construction, and the use of schemas, and the analysis of metaphor from a conceptual standpoint, from Ungerer and Smith, 1996. Typology is a branch of theoretical linguistics concerned with the identification and analysis of patterns across different languages. Contemporary typology as a field was given its initial impetus by the work of Joseph Greenberg. Greenberg looked at the sample of 30 languages, assessing them on a range of features. He then interrogated this dataset to see what happens emerge that might point to universal characteristics of language. According to Greenberg, it turns out that language with subject, verb, object likely to have postpositions. Greenberg observed, for instance, a correspondence between the basic word order of language and the relative order of nouns and adpositions. That is, whether the language has preposition plus the noun, phrases like English or noun plus the postposition, phrases like Hindi in Hindi. It turns out that languages with subject, object, verb order are overwhelmingly likely to have postpositions rather than prepositions. Talking about postpositions, many head final languages like Bengali, Korean, Tamil, Basque, Turkish, and Japanese use postpositions when they use their sentences. The postpositions among, for, to, and with are the most common postpositions. From typology, we'll go to functional grammar. It was developed by Dick in 1997. It functions to which language is put or talk about. There's iconicity in the relationship between formal realization of particular linguistic structure, meaning of the structure convey, or the function of the structure of grammar in communication. Corpus-based research from a functionalist perspective. The exploitation of corpus data by theorists, especially syntacticians, working from a functionalist perspective has taken a number of forms. However, in some studies using relatively small and arbitrary datasets, described as corpora, particularly in the 1980s and 1990s, we may see the beginnings of a movement toward incorporation of corpus data into a functionalist theoretical analysis. For example, Carden's 1982 The Study of Backwards Anaphora demonstrates that it is grammatical contrary to some scholars in earlier insertions. For pronouns to occur in context where the preceding discourse does not provide an antecedent for the pronoun. Anaphora. An anaphor is a pronoun or noun which refers to an entity that it does not specifically name, often something that has already been mentioned in the preceding discourse, while a cataphora, like anaphora, except that the cross-referring noun or pronoun refers to an entity that has not yet been mentioned and that is introduced subsequently in the discourse. From the study of Carden, that clearly show an awareness of importance of representativeness, there is a study of Swiderska, 1993, study of factors determining the word order in Polish transitive clauses, using data drawn from 14 texts using fiction and non-fiction. Likewise, demonstrates a concern for sampling techniques across the relative small corpus. Swiderska used random sampling of clauses to manually collect sufficient examples of each 6 possible orders of subject, verb, and object allowed in Polish. The basic word order in Polish in SVO pattern according to Swiderska. The first statement is the Polish word, which translates to I'm reading. The second one, from the Polish, translated to I'm reading a newspaper. Third one, there is an added word, and the second word remained, means I'm reading a newspaper or I read a newspaper. We may next consider studies that actually use large and/or standardized corpora on the kind we have discussed in earlier. This may be divided on the basis of how comprehensively the corpus evidence is addressed. Some studies of syntax treat the corpus solely as a repository of examples without taking a systematic approach to addressing the evidence of corpus as a whole. For example, de Klerk and Reed, 2000, draw examples of English clauses marked by conjunction unless Toivanen 2002 analyzes examples of the Swedish directed motion construction found in the Swedish parole corpus. Koenig and Simon 2000 study of English reflexive pronouns draw to Brown and BNC. And other studies uses corpus data in a systematic way by Valera, Sawirska, Son and Givone, Arnold, McCoon and McParland, Temperley and Holman. The studies we have cited have mostly been undertaken by theoretical linguists seeking to incorporate corpus evidence to their good analysis. A good example of this is the work aspect of Mandarin Chinese undertaken by Xiao and McInerney. Unlike the languages of Western Europe, Mandarin lacks tense on verbs, but it has wider range of aspect markers, which are collectively rather than more frequent than the markers of perfect and progressive aspect in English, although the patterns of differing frequencies across genres are similar between Mandarin and English. They claim to have created a more refined classification of aspect in verbs and sentences, although the tests used to identify different semantic features such as compatibility of a verb. Corpora and typology. Typology is a branch of linguistics which investigates the structures of the languages of the world, how these can be classified, and what the trends and patterns detected across languages can tell us about the nature of the language. The raw data of typology is observations made about the grammar of a very wide collection of languages. These observations in turn derive from the field of linguistics. Field linguistics predates corpus linguistics, but shares its focus on empirically observed examples of language. The basic word order of a language is the relative order of a subject, object, and verb. In prototypical transitive clauses, often represent via abbreviations such as SOV or SVO. Ergativity is a pattern that has been observed in case markings and other grammatical phenomena across a very wide variety of languages. Ergative language. This is a grammatical pattern and described as ergative if it treats the subject of an intransitive clause in the same way as the object of a transitive clause, with the subject of a transitive clause being treated differently. This is the opposite of the accusative pattern found in English and most European languages. Accusative and ergative languages. Accusative, such as English or German, the intransitive and transitive subjects are treated alike by the grammar, with the direct object treated differently. While ergative language, such as Basque, it is the intransitive subject and direct object that are treated alike grammatically. Du Bois, 1987, proposes that ergative systems come into being because of the influence of certain patterns in discourse, the patterns that exist not only in languages that have ergative grammatical marking, but in others too. His evidence is drawn mainly from the data from Zacapultec Maya, a language spoken in Guatemala, which has an ergative system of marking the bound pronouns that are affixed to each verb. The analysis is based on the data set which he describes as a corpus, and which might fairly be considered as such from the perspective of corpus linguistics. Corpora and the cognitive approaches to linguistics. Most corpus-based cognitive work of syntax has worked from the idea of construction as both in construction grammar by Goldberg and Croft and cognitive grammar by Langacker. The idea of the grammatical construction is most readily explained by the way of contrasting it to the idea of the grammatical rule. An approach to grammar based on constructions rather than rules fits well with the general concept of functionalism that form and function are linked, especially on the notable work of Stefan Grice and Anatol Stefanovich. Their concept is about collostruction. Like a collocation, it is a co-occurrence link between two items in a corpus but occurs significantly more frequently together than chance would predict. Collostruction is a co-occurrence relationship between a grammatical construction, which is the collostruct, and a lemma that tends to occur in one of its slots called the colloxeme.
The transitive construction has four slots: subject, object, and indirect object, and verb. Stefanovic and Grice investigate which verbs tend to occur in the verb slot of the detransitive and find that the lemmata most significantly attracted to this slot.
The detransitive is a grammatical structure where a verb is linked to two objects, the direct object and the indirect object, as well as a subject. This detransitive construction of a form, someone, verb, someone or something, alternates with the two dative construction, someone, verb, something to someone. A detransitive verb is one that occurs in these two structures. For example, give or send. Lemma is a group of word forms that are related by being inflectional forms of the same base word. The lemma is usually labeled by that base or stem. So, for instance, in English, destroy, destroys, destroying, and destroyed are all part of the verb lemma, which is destroy. But the noun destruction is a separate lemma because it is related to destroy by derivational rather than inflectional processes. The notion of the head word is generally equivalent to that of lemma. To dative, the English grammatical construction of the form someone, verb, something to someone. For example, the architect gave the money to the shopkeeper. It is distinguished by the recipient or the indirect object being marked by the preposition to and coming after the direct object, and alternates with the detransitive construction of the form someone, verb, someone, something.
As a result, Stefanovic and Grice argue that detransitivity is not actually a feature of any other verbs. Rather than our perception of a class of detransitive verbs is a phenomenon of their attraction to detransitive construction, and introduce the term colloxeme to describe a lemma attracted to a particular construction. Wierzbicka proposes an approach to semantics known as the natural semantic meta-language. In this approach, a complex word meanings are expressed in terms of simpler units of meaning until a set of irreducible semantic primes or primitives are unexplainable. Kiris uses corpus evidence from English and Greek to argue against Wierzbicka's analysis of one particular sort of verb, the fear or afraid. In both languages, the verb fear evolved over time from an original meaning of to put to flight or to scare away to its contemporary meaning of to experience the emotion of fear. The last topic is the corpora in the analysis of metaphor. A traditional approach to metaphor proposed by Lakoff and Johnson in 1980, it aims to invert the traditional approach to metaphor by focusing mainly on this everyday, conventionalized use of metaphor. It is driven by the observation that dead metaphors are absolutely pervasive in everyday usage. We often use our conceptualization of concrete things to structure the way we think about abstract things. Conceptual metaphors are realized in a range of metaphorical expressions. As with the cognitive grammar, CMT is based on the intuition and the analysis of invented examples. Jainan examines a range of phenomena associated with the metaphor where investigating relevant corpus data reveals patterns of use that are not straightforwardly predictable from a CMT account of the source domains, target domains, and expressions involved. One example of Damon's approach is a metaphor. An election is a horse race. Gainan makes similar observations with regard to the interaction of metaphor with grammar in corpus data. Metaphorical expressions are often grammatically distinct from corresponding literal expressions in terms of the categories and structures they may occur in. In the 1980s and to a lesser extent of 1990s, it would have been largely fair to describe corpus linguistics and functionalist linguistics as separate enterprises divided by the data they were based on. Functional linguistics was largely based on the analysis of relatively small numbers of authentic examples, or in some cases, fabricated examples, and on intuitions and grammatically or acceptability judgments. This was sharply different from the comparative very large textual resources being analyzed in corpus linguistics, even in the 1980s. Functional, cognitive, typological research is more and more open to the use of larger and larger datasets. And as this happens, the tools and techniques of corpus linguistics become more and more essential and integral to the analysis that are undertaken. That's all about corpus methods and functional linguistics. Hope you learned something today. Have a great day!